Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a more philosophical video for you. And by the way, this is going to be mostly me just talking. I put some pretty stuff on the table here, and none of which is from the brands I'm talking about at the moment. But nonetheless, I wanted to address a common concern that viewers have, or a thing that they think I've missed entirely, when in reality I'm making a strategic decision. Anyways, there are brands out there in the world who really aren't having any trouble selling the stuff they make, right? This could be because they are, for instance, in the custom knife world, or in any kind of gear, they're so hyped that anything that this brand produces will sell out in an instant without any concern. They could put a third sandwich on the market and people would still buy it just because, oh my God, it has that maker's mark, right? And I'm not going to name names here. I don't need to. You might get other brands that have over a long period of time come to hold the crown in their market segment, and as a result, they are, everybody is aware, and they're not going to have any trouble selling no matter what they're producing. There are companies that, for a long time, were sort of the prototypical high-end thing, and now they don't have to leave any money on the table. And then, of course, there are the companies that have learned that they can charge any price that the market will bear. These kinds of companies are to the point now where anything that they do will probably sell to somebody, and as a result, people always look at me very strangely when I review them. And every time I make a review of one of these kinds of things, or even just talk about them publicly, and especially when I talk about things like value, or when I talk about things like, wow, this brand really isn't putting in a lot of effort here. They're not innovating. They're not doing anything interesting, different. This is a place where they could increase value for consumers. People will pull me aside, and it's always the same kind of person. I almost hear this conversation beginning with, sport, because they feel like they're telling me something I've never heard of, but they'll tell me about this magical thing called supply and demand. Say to me, Nick, I'm not sure if you understand this, but fact is, some of those brands, they could sell anything, right? Why would they ever put effort into improving their products when they're already selling out as they're in? That's just leaving money on the table. If they spend more money to make the thing that they're going to sell anyways, they're leaving cash on the table, Nick. That would be silly. Or, Nick, why would you demand anything more of them? The market has spoken. This is clearly an amazing product. Why on earth would you, if they really needed to do that, they wouldn't, or some other flavor of apology, or my favorite is, Nick, you're saying the value is poor, but why would they lower prices? If anything, they should raise prices, because then they'd make more money off of it. All of these arguments are basically assuming that I'd never heard of or thought of the idea of supply and demand, and I gotta tell you, I'm no economist, but that had crossed my mind on occasion. But the reason that I bring these things up, the reason that I talk about why the high-end brands can be very lazy on occasion, they can fail to innovate, they can fail to deliver value, and they can fall behind their competition and still be selling, well, I got a couple of reasons for going that way. The first of which, honestly, is that, this is a temporary state for a company, I feel like. This is a state in which a company is choosing to burn a little bit of its brand equity in order to maintain the top, so to speak. When a company is at the top of their game and they're not doing anything special for it anymore, they're just kind of releasing the same thing over and over again, or they're maybe even letting things slip. I don't know, but they're not doing anything to build their brand again. They're just kind of trading on that. And this is not something that is immediately a problem for them. In fact, many companies, I feel like, are kind of trapped in this state of, it's selling, so why do we need to change anything? And this works well and good right up until it stops doing that, because sooner or later, some other company is going to step up. And, on the table here are actually good examples of companies that I think are stepping up and showing amazing quality, even though they're not in that market-leading position, so to speak. And they're going to get disrupted, right? Somebody's going to look and go, okay, I could pay this much money for one set of products here, or I could pay half the amount and get something that's nicer, more innovative, more available, not doing supply and demand games. I could do so much better if I just abandon that brand. And, this is generational, right? It could be that people who grew up with an aspirational brand are always going to be like, oh my God, yeah, that's the top of the rock. But, right now, in the watch game, for instance, there are generations of kids growing up with certain brands simply not being available to purchase, or coming across as very stodgy and backwards with relatively few new features, etc. So, sure, there's going to be the halo effect, but that's generational, and this will fade. And so whenever I'm making these videos, etc., people are like, well, come on, they don't have to change anything. Well, my answer is always, right now, they don't. There's another thing, by the way, that comes up often when I'm talking, especially when I'm doing stealth reviews with companies and talking about where I think the pricing should land on their product. Oftentimes they'll point point to these other companies and, well, look how much they're charging. I'm like, yeah, they're able to get away with that for a little while, but it ain't going to be too long yet. So always be careful and remember that this is not a long-term state that a company can be in. They are burning brand equity every moment they exist in that state, and until they are back on the train to innovation, so to speak, it's a little precarious, even if it might not feel that way at the moment. But more importantly, I think that it's important that we as consumers maintain some pressure even on these high-end companies, right? Even on the companies that have historically been top of the rock, and very often these companies got to where they are by being top of the rock at some point in time, right? But I think it's important that we maintain pressure, that we say, guys, you made some great stuff, but here's what it needs to look like in 2021, right? Here's your competition. Are you measuring up? I think that's very important because that will help that company when they decide to make some changes, when they decide it'll help them to maybe increase their value. It'll help them to maybe increase the feature set. It'll help them to maybe just improve. Overall, generally speaking, that is a beautiful thing, generally speaking. I think we all want the products that we are enjoying to improve over time, or to just get better in terms of value. I think maintaining that pressure is a very important force in this, rather than just leaning back and saying, well, they can charge it, so I better just take it, right? I don't like that particular approach. I think it's also important to highlight the alternatives, right? When we are saying, for instance, that your Halo brand is overpriced these days, when we are saying, for instance, that your Halo brand isn't really trying that hard, what we're effectively saying is, look at all the people that are trying harder. What we're effectively saying is, look at all the other companies that are really challenging them in this space, right? For instance, Omega is a company that is themselves a very high-end luxury brand, but they are pretty well known, I think, for pushing the technology envelope a little bit more than some of their more conservative competitors. And as a result, when we look at something like an Omega Seamaster relative to some of the competition, we can see some good things, some bad things, but nonetheless, we see differences, and we see that, interesting. If you don't care about brand as much, this can actually deliver a little bit more in a little bit of a lower cost package. Not that this is low cost, but I'm just saying. So I think highlighting the better alternatives, certainly if you don't care about the brand, and by the way, remember what I said about the burning brand equity? It's a good way to get to, I don't care about the brand anymore. But when you promote those better alternatives, you're again applying pressure to these companies to keep innovating. But the biggest thing that I think people fail to realize about this particular approach and about my view of all this is that I'm not here for the companies, right? I don't need to think about their bottom line. I'm here to think about yours. Right? In a lot of ways, my perspective, the perspective that I give on the channel is that of, I hope, a collector, of an enthusiast, right? And I personally want to see better value. Right? Even if a company could make a little bit more money by, charging more money and probably still sell, my advocacy is generally that they don't, right? That they instead help the community out, that they make their products available to more people by offering it at a better value. I want the best kinds of products, right? Even if a watch is good, if it could be better with the addition of a few small things, I'm going to argue that it should be better. Right? We should be improving these things. And I frankly just want to tell it like I see it, right? The fact that somebody could sell it for more money doesn't mean that they should. And I want to challenge people who are really taking us for a ride a little bit, whether it's because of their brand name or just because of poor decision making. But I don't particularly care that a brand could make more money by doing X, Y, or Z, or that if they, actually fix some of the issues that they could do even better, or that they'd have to pay a little bit more per unit for something they're going to sell anyways. I don't give a crap, right? That's not my problem. Instead, I'm going to advocate that they make the product better because that's a way that they're going to win new generations. And so I guess, when people pull me aside and tell me this, my feeling is always, well, at some level, thank you. I mean, for trying to teach me something. In this case, I got it. Thanks, bro. But at the same time, I'm always happy to learn. But more importantly, it's just that we're coming from a different perspective here. I'm looking at it in terms of, well, if no one's doing this, then the company will not stay in that position very long. If there's no pressure on them, they will fall. They will get disrupted. They will get picked up by, somebody else will come to be them in the next generation, and that's fine. It's the circle of life. But that's a thing. I think it's important that we as consumers maintain pressure on these companies, and I think it's important to highlight where there are better alternatives if you're willing to sacrifice a brand name. And I just want to remember and remind people that, my goal here is not to tell companies how to extract the most money out of me. My goal here is is to tell consumers how to get the very best products in their pockets at a reasonable value, or at the very least to find the very best product. Sometimes value isn't necessarily on the table, but nonetheless, that's my goal, and that's my reasoning, and that's why I think about these things in the way that I do. Is it unrealistic? Yeah, at some level, absolutely. Is it bad fiduciary something or another? Maybe, I don't know. But at the same time, that's my perspective. That's why I take things the way I do, and yeah, that's kind of where I land. So anyways, I hope this has been interesting to you, and that, that this resonates with you, that you understand where I'm coming from. And maybe if this saves me just one more of those, okay, sport, let's talk about economics sorts of chats, that'll be a beautiful thing too. So anyways, there you go. Hope this has been interesting to you, and have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.